And I'm
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Gibbons High Fernside virtual workshop. We're happy to be with you today, and we're going to have our city manager, Jennifer Ott, kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. Maybe some of you I saw the other night when we held our community meeting as well, but we're glad to have you and go over all this material. I think we are here truly to try to find some ways to balance a lot of different goals that we have for trying to make sure that the Gibbons neighborhood, Fernside neighborhood, is safe. And so we just to kind of do a little bit of a history on how we got here today and where we are in this process. And Lisa will go over some of this as well, but is really originally we were looking very carefully at the Fernside corridor, and both in kind of the near term in terms of trying to improve the pavement management there, but then also long term, how do we make that a really great street that's safe for all modes of travel? And through that process, what came up was kind of what do we do about this intersection at the Gibbons High Fernside intersection? It isn't it is an unsafe intersection. It's not our worst intersection in the city. It's certainly not our best, and it is not built in a way that we would build today. And we, as part of this larger discussion of the corridor and pavement management, we said, is this something we want to try to take care of now, or do we want to wait to do this? What do we do with this intersection that isn't ideal? And so through that process, I'll be honest, because there were some questions and I think we've heard lots of different things that, why did staff change its recommendations? And I would take full responsibility. I changed staff's recommendations to include to the city council the option and really kind of the leaning towards recommendation to change that intersection to make it safer, really just from a safety perspective. If we were going to already be in this corridor, there are a lot of efficiencies, both from cost and managing contractors to address issues when you're active in a corridor and to try to address the safety of that intersection at that time. So changed our recommendation, but really subject to a traffic study. Yes, we think we should try to make this intersection safer sooner rather than later because but let's make sure we have all the analysis we need to have to make that informed decision. So what the council said was, yes, we agree with you. We think it's important to look at this intersection and make it safer, but we agree also that we want to get more information to make sure we do that with our eyes wide open and understand this balancing act of if we make that intersection safer and how we do that operationally. And we have experts here today to explain that to you more from a technical standpoint, being careful about what that means for the surrounding neighborhood. Are we creating problems and other issues for some of the surrounding streets, and what kind of impact will that have? And so we've done a real deep dive with some of our experts who will be here to talk more. And again, what we're trying to do is balance a lot of different issues, and there aren't so far, unfortunately, easy answers. If we're going to have the two-way bikeway on Fernside, and we're going to try to make that intersection safer, but at the same time not create problems in some of the other streets around Gibbons, how do we balance all those different things? So we have tried very hard to come up with some ideas and thoughts for how we balance all those different issues. And what we have not made a decision about what we're doing. In fact, we're actively talking and thinking about all the feedback we got last Thursday and really thinking, what do we recommend to the Transportation Commission Council? And we want to get your feedback today as well, and thoughts from you about that, and so that you can hear what the different options are. But our true goal is to try to balance a safety of the intersection, the neighborhood, and making sure that we're also being kind of efficient with the staff's resources and the financial resources we have. So I'll stop talking so you can actually hear the details of what we're looking at, what we're thinking, and then, here to support our staff. So once again, I'm Jennifer Ott, City Manager, and I'll pass it on to Lisa.
Thank you so much. Before I share my screen and start the presentation, I would like to ask the other panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm Lisa Foster. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the city. Scott?
And I am Scott Wickstrom, the City Engineer, and I'll pass it to Susie.
Hi, folks. I'm Susie Hofstadter, Senior Transportation Coordinator.
maybe Sarah?
Yeah, yep. Hey, everybody. I'm Sarah Henry, Communications Director for the city, and I'll be collecting all of your questions.
Good afternoon. I'm David Parisi, Transportation Engineer with Parametrics. Jimmy?
Hello all, Jimmy Jessup, also Transportation Engineer with Parametrics.
Thank you. And then Sarah, did you want to tell folks
Yeah,
anything?
yeah, absolutely. Just so all of the participants in the meeting have been muted, and so what we're going to do is we're going to collect the questions through the Q&A during. So if you have a question, put it into the Q&A, and I'm going to be gathering them, and then at the end we'll be going through them all, and then making sure that we get them all answered. We're also in the process of developing an FAQ that we'll be posting that has answers to some of the questions that we've received at the other meeting. I also just wanted to note that Mayor Ashcraft and Councilmember Jensen are both on the call as well, joining us, listening to the presentation and to your comments. So back to you, Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Go ahead and share my screen. And to be clear, this is the same presentation, more or less, that was done last week at our open house. We're midstream in our collection of public feedback. I'll show you that timeline now. So we want to make sure everybody's getting the same information. So we're going to give a presentation. I'll begin with background and goals, and then we'll have David Parisi from Parametrics speak to the alternatives analysis, and then we'll talk about our draft recommendations for design and phasing that we're seeking input on, and then we will have our Q&A. So to begin with background and goals, this is the intersection that we're talking about. It's Gibbons Drive, High Street, and Fernside Boulevard is the intersection at hand. And then the neighborhood traffic study done was bounded by Fernside Boulevard, High Street, Central Avenue, and Broadway. Jen gave some background on how we got here, but to put it on a timeline, the project started with the Fernside Boulevard Traffic Calming and Bikeways project, which began public outreach in late 2023, looking at the corridor as a whole. And then as the team was working on our final design concepts, we identified a need for safety improvements at this intersection. And so in late 2024, the Fernside project team conducted a quick round of public engagement and about a proposal for the intersection specifically, and concluded that more study and outreach were needed. And March this year was when City Council directed staff to study the concept and share the findings with the community and then return to them. The consultant team collected data in the spring and conducted analysis over the summer, and now we are here. We're kind of in the middle of our public engagement period for this. And then from now through at least November, we'll have more opportunities for your input between this public engagement period and then the public hearings to come. Construction timing could be anywhere between 2026 and past 2030, depending on the direction. And just a reminder that our work is guided by city plans and policies, including our Vision Zero Action Plan and our Active Transportation Plan, and our general plan, which includes the street classifications, which guide our roadway design. All streets inside the study area are classified as neighborhood local streets, including Gibbons Drive. 2009 was the year that City Council first gave direction that Gibbons Drive should be designed as a local street. At that point, the designation was called transitional collector, which was defined as a street that needed to transition from being a collector street to a local street. And then the next street classifications were adopted in 2023. They didn't include this transitional category for anything to make it simpler, and they reflected target goals rather than current uses necessarily. And so with that background, you can see that the 2023 classifications were consistent with and continued City Council direction from 2009. So why change this intersection? I know a lot of people are asking that. The first reason that the reason we got here is that it's part of the Fernside project. Fernside is one of the streets that intersects with it. In March, the City Council approved a long-term design concept for the Fernside project, which is pedestrian median islands with a two-way protected bikeway for the full corridor. This design will achieve the goals to manage speeds, enhance pedestrian safety, and create a low-stress bikeway as called for in the Active Transportation Plan, which has Fernside Boulevard as a critical part of a connected, low-stress bicycle network serving all ages and abilities to multiple destinations. And in the long term, the Gibbons High Fernside intersection will need to be updated to incorporate these changes. Another reason is the intersection safety issues that the team identified while we were working on this project. We heard many concerns about this intersection during our Fernside project outreach before asking about the intersection specifically. In the Vision Zero Action Plan, Fernside Boulevard is identified as a high injury corridor. The Vision Zero Action Plan also analyzed individual intersections. This intersection on its own didn't rise to the level of being called a high crash intersection, but it is a collision hotspot on a high injury corridor. The project team is very focused on the design problems that we identified. This intersection has an atypical layout. It can be confusing for people who don't use it all the time. And it has significant pedestrian safety issues. And David Parisi will give more details on that design later. So here is what the City Council reviewed in March for the long-term Fernside project. To be clear, that construction is unfunded and will occur sometime around or after 2030. This includes removal of the right turn slip lane on the northeast corner here, which is crucial to protect cyclists with the future two-way bikeway, as well as pedestrians to create a shorter crossing. And City Council also reviewed changes at the Gibbons leg on what we're calling the southwest corner, includes restricting northbound drivers on Gibbons Drive to right turn only. On its own, this change on the southwest corner could have safety benefits for the intersection even before the long-term Fernside project. And so with these, but last fall and spring, we heard a lot of concern about rerouting vehicles from Gibbons onto nearby streets. So with these considerations, City Council directed the team to evaluate the southwest corner changes for the near term as well as the long term, with a study looking at how traffic circulation would change, and then reach out to the community and return to City Council. Based on the needs of the intersection and feedback to date, this project is working toward the following goals: to improve intersection safety at Gibbons High Fernside, simplify traffic operations, including in the context of the future Fernside Boulevard project, balance intersection safety needs with neighborhood traffic management. And now I'm going to pass to David Parisi, Principal Consultant at Parametrics. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, my name is David Parisi. I'm a traffic engineer with 35 years of experience working on issues just like this. And we conducted an intersection traffic study and a neighborhood circulation study. I'm going to talk about both those today. Next slide. Lisa alluded to many of the safety issues at the High Fernside Gibbons intersection. Obviously, it's a pretty complicated layout with 5 legs to the intersection, plus a high-speed slip lane from Fernside on the high, super long crosswalks with some about 70 feet long. We've seen drivers do some things that we were surprised about, but we've seen it more than once, including people making left turns on the wrong side of Gibbons and other movements. There is a traffic light at High and Fernside, but not across the, for pedestrians across the Gibbons leg. So there's not a walk, don't walk light there. And other things going on, such as high-speed movements from what we'll call southbound High onto Gibbons, which can cause some issues with pedestrians and others, and also increase speeds throughout the neighborhood. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about the traffic light itself at the intersection. It's a challenging one to run with 5 legs going into there with the signal phases. And when you start adding more phases, it makes congestion increase, queuing as well, and traffic delays. I mentioned the lack of pedestrian signal. And Lisa also discussed the need to provide the two-way bikeway on the north side of Fernside. That will require a signal phase as well. So we're trying to accomplish a lot at a very complicated intersection that has some very confusing movements and conflicts for different modes of transportation. Next slide, please. We took a look at 3 different ways to reconfigure this intersection. Alternative A is the original one, which was part of the Fernside study. All 3 alternatives would remove that slip lane from Fernside onto High, so let me make that super clear. And they would also kind of reduce the size of the intersection for safety purposes, to reduce speeds of turning traffic, reduce the length of crosswalks, try to make the signal phasing as efficient as possible, and other features. Alternative A would do one more thing, and it would restrict the left turn out of Gibbons onto High Street as shown here. So anybody coming out would be actually required to take a right turn, but all other traffic movements would continue to be allowed, including access onto Gibbons from High Street. And that was the original alternative that we considered. We also developed a couple of other alternatives to try to achieve many of the same objectives. Alternative B is something that we came up with that we thought, gosh, it'd be great if this could work, and that is to retain the left turn out of Gibbons. And in this case, by providing a traffic signal that's tied to the existing one that is in place. It would achieve many of the same goals as alternative A, with reducing speeds through turns and crosswalk lengths. But because it would add this traffic light, we just determined it would add some impacts for traffic, which I'll get to momentarily. Then alternative C, which we call low cost improvements, would also reduce the intersection's footprint, remove the slip lane from Fernside on the High, improve pedestrian circulation, and so on. But in the southwest corner, we would install painted bulb out, and in the long term, try to add a traffic signal for the pedestrians crossing Gibbons with walk and don't walk lights there. So these are the 3 alternatives that we've been considering for the intersection of High, Fernside, and Gibbons. Next slide, please. Wait, there was a 4th we tried to take a look at, and a lot of folks, and I love roundabouts, and a lot of people said, why don't you look at a roundabout? Well, we did. It's really difficult to fit a roundabout in this location, even if it had an odd shape like we're showing here. There's just not enough right of way to make everything work and actually provide a leg for Gibbons. So right of way would be required. There'd be longer pedestrian and bicycle travel paths. And we just pretty much eliminated that out of the gate. Unfortunately, there's just not a good way to make that work. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did 2 stages of analysis. The first was analyzing those 3 intersections. And the second was understanding if there's going to be a restricted movement, what the impacts would be on neighborhood traffic circulation. So of course, that would just apply to the first alternative, where the left turn out of Gibbons would be restricted. So I'm going to walk through both of these stages of analysis that we conducted. So the first one, again, is looking at the intersection from a safety and operational standpoint. Next slide, please. And what we're asking ourselves was, how do these 3 alternatives improve safety and simplify traffic operations? And again, as Lisa mentioned, taking into context the future of Fernside with the complete street improvements, including two-way bikeway along the north side of the street. So back to alternative A, this is the option with all the safety and operational benefits that I described earlier, but restricting the left turn out of Gibbons. And you can see that we're showing 2 green check boxes here because we wholeheartedly believe that this improves safety for a number of reasons: shorter pedestrian crossings, reduced vehicular speeds, and more of a simplified, common type of intersection layout with 4 legs. Also, from a traffic operations standpoint, we can reduce the number of traffic signal phases compared to, for instance, alternative B, which I'll talk about in a moment. In the near term, actually, we see less traffic congestion, that is less delays and less queuing than we have today. And in the longer range, with the addition of the 2-way bikeway, it actually very similar to what we have today. Maybe a few more seconds of delay, depending on the time of day, but generally favorable traffic operations. Alternative B, which would retain the left turn out of Gibbons with a new traffic signal, which would be tied to the existing one. They'd actually operate together with the same controller and software and whatnot. Would provide a lot of safety benefits, very similar to alternative A, but from a traffic operations standpoint, again, from vehicular delay, queuing, and congestion, it actually worsened conditions because there'd be too many traffic signal phases that we're trying to operate at this intersection with the addition of another one. There'd be a lot of what's called all red time when we're clearing traffic out, and it'd be a very inefficient traffic scenario. As a matter of fact, we'd expect so much congestion that traffic would probably divert to other streets to avoid this intersection altogether. Next slide, please. And then finally, alternative C, which again, we're calling a low-cost option, which has many of the same benefits as alternatives A and B from a safety standpoint. Certainly would slow down vehicular speeds. It wouldn't slow it down as much and would not have as many safety benefits, but certainly would have some compared to alternatives A and B. And then, but from an operations standpoint, would also have some severe traffic congestion implications because we're just trying to do too much, particularly with all the signal phases at this intersection. Next slide, please. This is just a summary matrix highlighting the same conclusions I just mentioned. From a safety standpoint, all 3 options would definitely improve safety at the intersection, some more than others, particularly A and B compared to C. Near-term alternative A would provide minimal change or possibly improvement for traffic congestion, whereas alternatives B and C in the longer term would worsen traffic congestion and could induce more neighborhood traffic diversion, different streets. Next slide, please. So the second stage of analysis we conducted primarily related to alternative A. And the reason that is because alternative A is the only option that would have a prohibited turn movement compared to what's there today. Again, the left turn out of Gibbons would no longer be allowed. So we wanted to understand, okay, if that occurred, what would happen? And are there remedies to help resolve that and address conditions in the neighborhood? Next slide, please. Specifically, we want to understand of the cars that make that left turnout today, where would they go and what would the impacts be? And again, this would only pertain to the alternative A. Next slide, please. The streets shown in white are all designated by the city as neighborhood local streets. The target design speed for these types of streets is 20 miles an hour, which makes these streets as livable as possible. The target traffic volumes are generally between 1,000 and up to 4,000 vehicles a day, but hopefully on the lower end of that range because 4,000 is around capacity. So we would expect, like on other streets throughout Alameda, average daily traffic volumes to be in the 1,000 plus range on these types of streets. Comparatively, neighborhood greenway street targets are about 1,500 vehicles per day, and these are streets that are really emphasized for bicycle and pedestrian movements. Next slide, please. We did collect daily traffic counts during the weekday at many of the streets. You can see that, for instance, Fernside carries about 8,600 vehicles a day at the location shown here. That's actually classified as a neighborhood connector street and is serving on the low end of what we'd expect, between 4,000 and 18,000 vehicles a day. Gibbons, again, a neighborhood local street, carrying about 2,200 vehicles just south of the study intersection. And two streets that are very close to those that we're going to be talking about today, Cornell and Bayo Vista, about 150 to 160 cars a day, well below what we'd expect to be on the lower end of a neighborhood local traffic street. So we're already seeing low volumes on many of the streets throughout the neighborhood. Next slide, please. We also measured travel speeds along Gibbons, just south of the state intersection and in both directions. The 85th percentile speed is about 31 miles an hour. So what that means is that about 85% of the people travel at 31 miles an hour or lower along Gibbons, a little bit higher than we'd like to see, but some of that is people rushing to get to the green light or coming in off of high with that high speed right turn movement. We also did a neighborhood cut-through survey. We want to understand where are people coming from and going to, and how many originated within and how many originated from outside of the neighborhood. And we were able to determine during the peak AM period, which was the critical period with the highest volumes taking left out of Gibbons, about over 55% of the traffic making that movement actually did not originate in the neighborhood. And we determined that by doing some surveys of the last few digits of license plates of cars and then matching them up and seeing if they enter the neighborhood and exit within a certain amount of time. So again, just to try to understand vehicle origins and destination patterns. Next slide, please. So this information is super helpful. We had traffic counts, we knew traffic patterns, and how many people were local versus cutting through the neighborhood. And we're able to estimate what streets folks would go to if the left turn was no longer allowed at Gibbons, based on the information I just described, plus the distance of the trips, the characteristics of the street. Some streets are, like Gibbons, are 40 feet wide, some are 30 or 35 feet wide. That certainly could affect travel patterns. If drivers need to go through all-way stop signs or make lots of turns, navigate parking along narrow streets, all this stuff are things that we considered in our estimates of traffic redistribution. Next slide, please. And this graphic shows what we think would be the worst case for some of the traffic redistribution. I should state that we counted about 88 cars during the AM peak hour making that left turn in the morning. And it's not a huge amount of traffic. I think it's like one car every 40 seconds or so making a left turn. And about 55% of that, or 50 of those vehicles, are actually cars that originate from outside of the neighborhood. If those 88 cars were to be redistributed because of the left turn prohibition, we estimated approximately where they go, just with some ranges. And we're not fooling ourselves. There's many different streets that people could take, but we think the most of the drivers that would be diverted would take Southwood or Bayo Vista. A good half of the diversion we would assign there, and we realize it is a 30-foot wide street. But again, most of this would be in one direction, or all of this would be one direction. That's less than one car a minute that would be diverted along those streets in our estimate. We also believe that some traffic would use Cornell, another narrow street, about one car every 2 minutes, possibly diverting to that street, as well as other streets. We're showing throughout this map lots of other streets that vehicles could take. Some don't even show blue marks, such as Cambridge, but we do realize that traffic would be diverted to other roadways if 100% of all the traffic was diverted. Next slide, please. And the graphic I showed you a moment ago was based on AM peak hour trips. This steps back and is our estimate on a daily basis of what could happen with before and after, just on a few of the select streets. Obviously, we're showing that Gibbons today carries about 2,200 cars. We think on a daily basis that volume would reduce down to about 1,400 vehicles. Bayo Vista, we estimate, would increase on a daily basis to about 600 vehicles, and Cornell on a daily basis about 450 vehicles, higher than what both of those streets are carrying now, but still on the low end on neighborhood local streets, on comparative streets throughout Alameda. Next slide, please. This is my last slide before I give it back to Lisa. We do realize, like I said before, we do have some high speeds on some streets, particularly Gibbons, coming in and out of the neighborhood for various reasons. And, you know, we recognize that speed reduction can be mitigated somewhat through other means as well, including some traffic calming and other features that the city is considered as part of this overall project. To you, Lisa.
Thank you, David. So based on that study, the staff and consultant team have developed draft recommendations, both for intersection design, neighborhood streets, and timing. And we are hearing your input and taking that in right now. Our recommendations aim to balance the design considerations and the project's goals, which, to remind you, are the intersection safety itself, its operation with the Fernside bikeway, and neighborhood traffic management. The team's long-term recommendation is alternative A with neighborhood traffic calming. We were seeing safety benefits with the simplified intersection design. It functions with a long-term addition of the Fernside bikeway. But we recommend implementing with neighborhood traffic calming because, as David was showing, prohibiting left turns from Gibbons onto High will change neighborhood traffic circulation with potential speed issues. So what do we mean by neighborhood traffic calming? You know, which are interventions to help mitigate speeds, and in this case, cut through traffic. It could include things like speed humps, mini roundabouts and traffic circles, new marked crosswalks. You know, we have in mind possible locations for many roundabouts of Gibbons, Northwood, Southwood, and Southwood, Bayo Vista, Fairview. These are large, skewed intersections that could also use some attention. In order to, In order to implement this project, both the intersection improvements and the neighborhood traffic calming, we need to leverage larger projects. And doing so provides us with 3 timing options. First, 2026 with the annual paving program when it does the near-term Fernside Boulevard project, which is just quick build improvements west of High on Fernside. And then the paving program goes to the West End for the rest of 2026 and 2027. So our next opportunity with the pavement program is 2028. And then we have an opportunity with the long-term Fernside Boulevard project, which is sometime around 2030 or later, depending on when we are able to find funding for it. We have a series of timing considerations that I'll go over with you that help us decide which of these opportunities would be good for us to move forward with these interventions. And first is the safety need and urgency. So implementing the southwest corner intersection update in 2026 or 2028 would address the intersection safety needs sooner. The next is the neighborhood traffic calming. So construction in 2028 or 2030 for that southwest corner would allow for concurrent holistic neighborhood traffic calming to respond to that shifting traffic circulation. 2026 is not feasible with our existing projects. And we also are considering coordination with the Gibbons Drive Sidewalks and Trees study outcome. That study implementation in 2028 or 2030 allows for design coordinations with that study. It is underway, and 2026 would be too soon to fully coordinate. And then our final timing consideration is other major construction projects. Implementation in 2028 or 2030 allows for completion of other projects, most notably the roundabout at Clement Tilden that breaks ground this year and will necessitate significant detours during construction. With all of those considerations, our draft recommendation is a 3-stage implementation to balance safety needs with neighborhood traffic management. And to be clear, we would be recommending to take each step in order. First, in 2026, with that near-term Fernside project and the paving project, we would implement alternative C, the quick build updates at the southwest corner, no turn restriction, and then also assess adding some speed humps on Gibbons at that point. And then when we have our next opportunity in 2028, we would come back, implement alternative A at the southwest corner, along with neighborhood traffic calming in the neighborhood. And then in 2030 plus, with the long-term Fernside project, we would implement the north side changes to that intersection. So we are, as you know, we're in the middle of collecting feedback on that draft recommendation. Before we go to the Transportation Commission and then City Council, we are preparing a compilation of the feedback for the Transportation Commission that you'll be seeing in October. The commission date is October 22nd. So, you know, we're midstream here, but I wanted to share a little bit of some of the feedback we've heard so far, because we have gotten quite a bit. One is a desire for interventions like speed humps and crosswalks in the neighborhood before or instead of changing the intersection. Also concerns about speeds and dangerous driving on narrower streets, and concern that there would be more diversion onto streets like Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale than projected. And before we go into the Q&A, now is our chance to hear what you think, or one of the chances. So you can share your questions and feedback in the Q&A today about intersection design, traffic circulation, timing and phasing, or locations in need of neighborhood traffic calming, like speed humps or mini roundabouts. The online survey is open. It will be open until midnight on October 5th. And then after that, you'll have opportunities to participate in public hearings, including Transportation Commission on October 22nd, and City Council likely in November, possibly December. So I will stop sharing. And Sarah, do you want to tell us how this is going to go?
Yeah, so we have quite a bit of questions. I've been collecting them all, and I'm trying to kind of sort through them so that we can get through them all, which would be our intention today. So I think what I'll do, Lisa, if it works for you, is I'll ask the question, and then David, Scott, Jimmy, Lisa, Jen, whoever is the one that, respond right away, and then other folks can add in, but let's just kind of get straight to the answers as quickly as possible. And the first question that I received asked about the changes to the intersection, and specifically, how would they make it safer? Because the crashes that we've been talking about are caused by excessive speed entering or leaving the island, and these changes don't change that dynamic. David?
Okay, great. I'd like to let's talk about the type of crashes that are occurring. And I'm wondering if Lisa or Jimmy want to talk about that. We get to then talk about why these remedies would help address those.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the crashes briefly, as there are a number of questions that address it as well. In the time period that was evaluated from 2017 to 2021, there were 22 crashes that occurred at the intersection. Not all of those, but a subset of those resulted in injury. About 5 of those resulted in injury. In 2023, when we performed outreach with the community over the entire Fernside corridor, we portrayed the Fernside Gibbons High intersection as having 5 crashes that resulted in injury. But there are, of course, many more crashes that are behind that. So overall, in that 5-year time period, 22 crashes have occurred. And a lot of those pertain to a number of different vehicle movements prior to the crash, a number of different primary collision factors, including unsafe speed, improper turns, failure to yield right of way. And also over a range of times, daylight, in darkness, and mostly in fair weather conditions. We didn't identify any trends relating to specifically what movements were contributing more to crashes. But in general, I think it does characterize the intersection as having the complexities and the turning movements and conflicting movements of the multiple modes of transportation, which go behind the number of crashes that we saw.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'll add that it's kind of a rule of thumb that for every reported collision, there's 2 or 3 that go unreported. And so there's quite a safety issue at this 5-legged intersection with the very awkward alignment of the lanes. I think I went over many of the attributes we think would make this a safer intersection, including all 3 options showed eliminating the free right, but also reducing the speeds coming into Gibbons, and tightening up curb radii at the intersections to reduce the speeds of turns, increase the sight lines between motorists and pedestrians and other vulnerable users, and then finally reducing the length of the crosswalks. So we feel pretty strongly that these enhancements would improve safety.
Thank you. Next question is asking about the impact to air quality, specifically about the carbon sequestration that happens with the trees on Gibbons and moving it onto the side streets with less trees, but other air quality impacts as well.
I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that question.
Maybe it's something we can get an answer for and put on the FAQ.
Sure. I mean, there's no direct impacts on trees with this project as we proposed it. I know the Gibbons Trees and Sidewalks project is underway. That would be a separate project. We do have some implications for congestion that David reviewed during the presentation. So alternative A is the best alternative presented related to reducing congestion.
Which would ultimately benefit the air quality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. A person has a comment here. Again, I'm going to ask the clarifying questions. I'm not going to put the comments, although we will have all of your comments. I've copied them all we'll read them. But just a person wanted to reflect the fact that there's been more road rage incidents in Alameda and kind of making sure that the changes, are solving that problem. Next question is asking how closing off the left turn from Gibbons improves safety when there's not a significant safety issue there, but then it pushes all the traffic onto the small streets where the Edison kids walk or bike. David, if you could take that one.
Sure. Retaining the left turn would provide a lot of congestion, as we showed you alternatives B and C. So the congestion, delay, road rage, you name it, could get worse. The congestion and again, because all the retaining that left turn, as we showed you in alternatives B and C, would cause, again, increased congestion, increased queuing, increased delays, and most likely increased diversion as well, because as we showed, there'd be just a huge amount of queuing at the intersection. And again, keep in mind, this is in light of the overall Fernside plan that we're looking at with the signal phasing and how the intersection would work. So I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly right. Well,
David, do you want to speak to the relative safety of the kinds of volumes that we're talking about on the new streets?
Sure. With diversion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So again, we are seeing about 88 cars. Some days it's higher, some days it's lower, making that left turn during the peak time, which is about 1 car every 40 seconds. 55% of those are cut through traffic. So about 50 of those vehicles are cutting through. With the diversion that we expected, I think we said on Cornell about 1 car every 2 minutes, additional car in the northbound direction, right? Cutting through, not an increase in the other direction. Southwood Bay Vista, I'm looking at my notes. Less than 1 car increase every minute. We don't think those would add more safety issues to these streets. Yes, I think some folks we do recognize from a percent basis, it's a big increase in percent of car trips on those streets, but quantitatively, 1 car every minute or 2 We don't see that as adding a major safety issue, particularly in one direction, where the capacity on these streets would enable it at reasonable travel speed.
Thank you. And I can add, we think these volumes can be very safe. We are concerned about speeds. And that is why we recommend implementing with neighborhood traffic calming measures.
Great. The next question gets up.
Can I just, I'm
I was-
sorry
Go
to,
ahead. Go ahead.
oh, maybe Scott, you want to go and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, I want to kind of at least touch back on the original question about how removing the left turn makes that intersection safer. And I know David Friese already kind of spoke about this earlier, but it's worth kind of reiterating. It's a general rule of thumb that when you have a big, large, wide open intersection, there's two things that happen. One, people will travel faster through that large open space. And two, it's also more difficult to kind of judge or determine what the opposing traffic movements are doing. Is that person going to make a left? Are they going to slow down and make the right turn? It's a pretty well accepted traffic engineering maxim that to improve safety on an intersection, you want to shrink the intersection down. You want to make it smaller so you have less distance to cross that intersection. You have less speed going through that intersection, and it's a little bit easier to kind of judge what other drivers are doing and make your movements accordingly. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that a big factor in basically alternatives A and B, and unfortunately B has a bit of a challenge with the operational aspects, but it is really reducing the size of that intersection, one, for the pedestrians, which we're talked about already, but also for the vehicles as well.
Thanks, Scott. It's helpful.
Yeah, and Sarah, I want to zoom out for just a second because I just want to be really clear. And I heard this on Thursday afterwards, was that some people weren't entirely clear what the city was kind of recommending. I want to be clear what the change before we were talking about, hey, let's make these safety improvements to the intersection as part of the Fernside pavement management. What our recommendation is now is to kind of take that, don't do it as part of the pavement management, but do it as a project in 2028 in possibly a future pavement management, but do it at the same time that we're really being thoughtful about what changes we make to the neighborhood. Because what we really want to do, we don't want to just fix Gibbons or Bay Vista or Cornell. What we want to do is try to really get people from driving through this neighborhood, the entire neighborhood altogether. And so we would have more time to look at some neighborhood calming. When we mean neighborhood calming, that means potential speed bumps. It means roundabouts, other mechanisms that the engineers can look at to really try to divert traffic well before people even come into the neighborhood, so that we're taking a more holistic neighborhood approach and trying to minimize the cars that drive through this neighborhood. So that's the change where we're saying, hey, let's make this intersection safer, but let's do it at the same time that we also make some changes to divert that traffic from the entire neighborhood to try to make the entire neighborhood safer.
And just to add, just from some of the questions, folks are asking, if you were to do that, exploring these alternatives to enhance safety, could you do that without making the changes to the intersection, or are those changes to the intersection also part of that? I don't know, Scott, if you want to answer that one.
Really what we're looking at, and I think we have to come back to think about where our original project was here. We were looking at the Fernside Bikeway project, and council basically approved the two-way cycle track on the north side of the road. And as part of that, we started looking at this intersection. And really, when we look at this intersection, we came to alternative A, which as we looked at alternative A and the potential for diversion, then we start recognizing diversion to other streets, and maybe there is a cause or reason at that point to start looking at some traffic calming, the speed bumps, the additional potential roundabouts throughout the neighborhood. I don't know that we are in a position to necessarily separate those right now.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Sarah, I mean, if you think back to the goals that we stated in this, and also some of the council direction we received, was to look at that, and this balancing act I talked about at the beginning about making that intersection safer. So could we do neighborhood calming without the intersection? Yes, we could look at roundabouts or speed bumps or other things, but then that doesn't achieve the larger goal that we're trying to do, is to balance the safety needs of that intersection as well. So we're trying to find a way to do both, is to try to calm the traffic in that neighborhood, but also make that intersection that we don't think is safer for pedestrians.
Next question asks, what's the relative cost difference between obtaining the right-of-way for the roundabout at that intersection versus all the many intersection roundabout improvements that Scott talked about throughout the different neighborhoods that would be needing for traffic calming to support shutting off the Gibbons left turn? I don't know if we've done that cost analysis. Maybe we can add that to the FAQ. Scott?
Yeah, we haven't done that cost analysis. I would just add that the roundabouts that we are contemplating, the mini roundabouts are I'll say a smaller, more abbreviated version and much less expensive. If we were to do a roundabout at Fernside Gibbons High, it would be a major endeavor, a major planning effort. So in addition to the right-of-way cost, which we haven't looked at, haven't even considered, the cost of construction would be substantially higher. And I think there's a subtlety that David Parisi pointed out in his presentation that, as we laid out that roundabout for that intersection, because of the angle at which Gibbons enters into that intersection, it's unlikely that we'd be able to maintain access from Gibbons to a roundabout at that intersection. Now, we haven't done the full detail layout design on that, but on the initial preliminary look at it, a roundabout, we get us right back to alternative A, where we no longer have access to that intersection from Gibbons. And so there you could almost say there's two strikes against the roundabout, not having the right of way. And as a lot of residents have rightly talked about, is losing that access to Gibbons. And in this case, we may even be losing access both in and out of Gibbons as well. So, and like I said, we haven't done the full detailed design on that, but on the preliminary, the roundabout doesn't solve the issue at hand.
Got it. Where can folks find the EIR NOE for the Fernside project, and was the closure of Gibbons included in that document? And then what is the CEQA plan to have the Gibbons closure?
The Fernside Boulevard Traffic Calming and Bikeways project has gotten to the point of design concepts, hasn't had anything like that.
Okay. The next person is asking, why are two-way bikeways safer? What they are thinking is that two-way bike lanes are only safer if there are no vehicles crossing, like driveways. So if somebody can address that.
Hey, Jimmy, do you want to take that one on since you did the research for the Fernside project?
Yeah, in general, providing separated bikeways are safer for all modes of transport, largely due to slowing down vehicle speeds, turning speeds in and out of side streets and driveways, and then also providing separation of a physical barrier for bicyclists from the vehicle travel lanes. We went through a long process in the Fernside Boulevard Traffic Calming and Bikeways project and outreach, looking at a number of alternatives that included one-way bikeways, two-way bikeway on the water side of Fernside. And for a number of reasons, the two-way bikeway was selected both on the basis of input received from the public, availability of right-of-way to fit different types of designs and other traffic calming elements in conjunction with the two-way bikeway, and also for the safety improvements that the separated bikeway would provide.
I can add.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I could add. In this case, because of how the streets are, putting a two-way bikeway on the water side of the road avoids 10 side street crossings, because there are fewer side streets on that side, and it connects with existing two-way cycle tracks, eventually both sides of the project. So those were another couple of safety reasons that we included the two-way.
Yep. The next person asked where they can get a copy of the question and answers from the open house last Wednesday, and I'll just answer that we're going to take all of those and all of the questions from today and compile them and make an FAQ on the website. So we'll be doing that in the next week or so. The next question is asking
about. I can add to that. We'll also publish a compendium of public outreach and input received with the Transportation Commission agenda, and it'll also be on the project webpage.
The next question asks about the volume of traffic on High Street.
We didn't take traffic counts on High Street as part of the project specifically, but Caltrans does have information on the volume of roadways within its jurisdiction across the High Street Bridge. Caltrans reports about 35,000 vehicles per day.
Great. Has it been considered to not allow traffic entering Gibbons and only allow traffic out? This person is concerned specifically about the need for egress in an emergency and the designs they don't see accounting for somebody leaving the area in emergency. So they're saying not allow traffic to enter Gibbons, but just allow traffic to exit on both left and right.
Yeah, and I'll take a answer to that one. If we're thinking about emergency, there's a couple different ways you look at it. The first is whether or not we're talking about fire and or police response, and those we've kind of already checked with our fire, and they could accommodate, and they have other primary response routes that they use. If we start talking about a bigger type of emergency that looks at a large-scale evacuation of the island, if it's a major fire, tsunami, whatever the case might be, the bottleneck will not be Gibbons Drive northbound. The bottleneck will be getting cars through the signalized intersection and onto the High Street Bridge. And that's where we really, if we want to talk about strictly getting cars off the island, it is all about signal optimization and how do we maximize that. And this goes back to what David Parisi has done. We've done a variety of different analyses about how these changes to the intersection would affect operations. And because we add a signal and some signal time specifically for the Gibbons Drive northbound entrance into that intersection, it makes the signal operate less efficiently. There's a small number of people that obviously live near the north end of Gibbons that might take a little bit longer time to exit, but the vast majority of the people, the 35,000 people that Jimmy talked about, daily traffic across High Street Bridge, and the higher volume that would occur during an emergency event would actually operate more efficiently without the Gibbons leg to this intersection.
Thank you.
So it operates as a convenience now. It's not really there for emergency response.
Thank you. And I think that was the emphasis of their question, was having people want to leave the island. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of questions all at once because they're related. So pay close attention. So we're saying that closing off Gibbons, the left turn lane, that will improve safety, but we haven't studied the pedestrian bike traffic. So they want to talk specifically about how do we know that there's going to be safety improvements without studying the bike and ped traffic. And then specifically diverting one car per 40 seconds to take left turns onto High from Bayo Vista, Fairview, or Thompson. What happens then to the safety on High Street? And then how does High Street compare to Fernside in terms of being a high injury corridor? And then kind of the last summary of this is thinking about if the issue is added congestion, what would be the typical wait time if we left with the Fernside project as planned, but didn't eliminate the left turn from Gibbons? How much does that increase the congestion? You got it? Scott, no.
That was a lot of questions.
They're all related though.
I heard one that I can answer quickly is how does High Street compare to Fernside in terms of being a high entry corridor? Fernside is a high entry corridor and High Street is not designated as one in our Vision Zero action plan according to crash data. Scott.
And then I will add that to close again this northbound leg of Gibbons improves the operation of the intersection in the short term, which is to say there will be less delay or less congestion backup on High Street. So even if those 88 morning AM trips divert to different directions, there will be increased efficiency at the intersection, and the actual backup on High Street will be less than it currently exists during the peak periods. There were questions about bikes and peds. Specifically, and I'm going to jump all the way to the long term, which is when we have the two-way cycle track. That's when we do anticipate seeing much higher volumes of bicycle traffic. And when we do a two-way cycle track across a major roadway, we're always very sure to put a protected bicycle phase for that intersection. So that will definitely increase safety. That is a key component of the two-way cycle track. Putting it on the outside of the water side, there will be a separate signal phase in the long term when that gets done. How does that, and so that it ties into one of the other questions, which is about the delay. And delay is often expressed in terms of number of seconds or the impacts of congestion. It's often expressed in the terms of delay or average delay at an intersection that each motorist faces on average during the peak morning and or evening commute times. And I'm going to ask Jimmy to correct me if I'm wrong here. But at the moment, I believe the intersection operates roughly at about a 30-second delay in the peak periods. And if we were to maintain the northbound traffic leg in the long-term condition, when we have to add in that separated bike phase, the delay will increase to almost 70 or over 70 seconds. That might not seem like a lot, but we're talking about every single person who goes to that intersection during the peak period is delayed by an additional 40 seconds. And from a traffic engineering perspective, that's substantial. That's a very significant delay to add on. So that is why I think we let off saying that in the long term, when we do have that two-way protected cycle track, the closure of that northbound Gibbons lane is kind of important because of the operation of that intersection. And Jimmy, you want to add on and or correct?
I do want to correct. Very small adjustment. Scott thinks the existing delay is correct. About 30-second delay in the most severe peak period in the morning. In the long term, if nothing was adjusted at the intersection, that delay would increase to an average of 50 seconds per vehicle. I will also add the queues that are most substantial today are the northbound High Street queues. Sometimes they back up and interfere with the Bio Vista intersection itself. But in the long term baseline, if no adjustments were made to the intersection, those queues in not just worst case, but a normal average case would also back up and fail to clear the intersection in multiple approaches, not just the northbound High Street direction. So you'd also have quite some challenges with the eastbound Fernside turning left onto High Street, the westbound right, also trying to get to the High Street Bridge, as well as the southbound left movement. So you would be spreading some of those effects to other movements.
Jimmy, somebody else had asked in a similar question, asking about the traffic study. Did you specifically look at the time from 8 to 8:30 where you have the kids walking and biking to the elementary school and the high school to understand that volume of traffic by pedestrians and bicyclists?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We took vehicle turning movement counts at a number of intersections within the neighborhood and along Gibbons, and then also at other intersections for 2-hour peak AM and PM periods. And the AM period included from 7 to 9 AM, and those were multimodal counts, vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycle counts. So that was incorporated in the thought process.
Okay.
And then also,
and that 88,
sorry, go ahead.
88 cars was during the peak 1 hour, which is included in that school commute period.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Next question was talking about the reclassification of the street. Folks are asking how did that get started? Was it an individual or a commission that led that? And then when was it actually reclassified as a local street from a transitional collector? Just wanting to understand more about that process.
So I spoke about this a little bit in the presentation. In 2009. The street classifications called Gibbons a transitional collector. That definition was: transitional collectors currently function as island collector streets, but are desired to operate as local streets. Through a series of measures either implemented today or in the future, the street's traffic volumes and/or trip characteristics will be altered to the point that a lower classification is warranted. And then the next street classifications after that were adopted were in 2023. There was we received guidance on those from a Transportation Commission subcommittee. Nobody on that subcommittee lives on Gibbons. And that one, the classification for Gibbons is neighborhood local street. And there weren't transitional categories in those classifications to keep things simple. The classifications are supposed to represent targets rather than existing. It's a slightly different approach to do neighborhood street classifications. And it's sort of the same idea is that, Gibbons should be a local street is consistent between the two.
And that original recommendation in 2009 was the Transportation Commission?
No, that was adopted by City Council as well.
City
It's part of
Council,
the general
okay,
plan.
got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Excuse me.
perfect.
And
No worries. Okay, next question. Can we add speed bumps to Bay Vista and Cornell to reduce the speed of cars going through the alternative routes?
That's something we could certainly consider as if we would move ahead with either the midterm option or in the long-term option as a part of our neighborhood kind of overall paving program in the area.
If I could just say, I just want to neighborhood calming when we talk about that. Those are the types of things we're talking about, and we would love thoughts about where that type of traffic calming speed bumps or roundabouts, where those should go. And so please give us your feedback on that so that we can be thinking about where we might put some of that neighborhood calming.
And then this person is suggesting that those calming efforts provide the opportunity for increased planting inside of the mini roundabouts instead of just the hardscaping. What has been done from an enforcement standpoint over the last few years at this intersection? This person recalls how 10 years ago there were a lot more motorcycle police that deterred folks, and perhaps enforcement would increase the safety here. Scott, do you want to take that one?
Sure, and maybe Jen can add on a little bit, but I think it's pretty well known that our police force number of officers that they've had available has decreased. They do not have the same level of traffic enforcement that they would like and what they've had historically. So that is basically it's kind of, I'll say, from an engineer standpoint, that's something we recognize, but yeah, maybe Jen can add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I will say, and I don't have the information right in front of me, but that because we do have limited resources, we tend to allocate our traffic enforcement resources along our high entry corridors, which Fernside is. So I think 70% of the traffic enforcement occurs on our high entry corridors. So I can say that our police are on this corridor. I know that they are monitoring and they're enforcing there. So that is part of what they do, because they are really trying to focus on the areas where there are, the worst or worst kind of situation. So, but that's something we can follow up with and get more information about too, in terms of traffic stops and enforcement, and we can follow up with some additional data.
Great. Sorry. Okay, when they looked at, I think this is for Jimmy, when you did the traffic study and then you looked at the crashes and the injuries, folks are asking how many have those occurred at this intersection at the exact location, and then they specifically asked how the calculations were made. Maybe Lisa or Jimmy.
We investigated the California State Highway Patrol crash database to take a look at historical crashes. And as David Parisi mentioned, these are only crashes that are reported to local enforcement officials and then make it into the state database. For general rule of thumb, we expect 2 to 3 times the number of crashes that have occurred, more than what we find in the database. And that data does describe a number of facets of the crashes, primary crash factors, how many parties were involved, if a bicyclist or pedestrian was involved, the severity of injuries that occurred. And so that's the primary source for our analysis.
For alternative C, is Gibbons still part of the traffic light sequence, or do people turn onto High Street first?
that's just the quick build. More, yeah.
Yes,
Scott, go ahead.
the alternative C, the signalized intersection would function exactly as it functions today. So alternative C is the quick build where we're doing the paint post build-outs at the corner. The signal operation would remain unchanged in the short term. In the long term, I will say, and I maybe should add this in there, in the long term, when the two-way cycle track is added, then obviously we're looking at adding a protected bike phase, but that's in the long-term condition. But in the short term, it would function in the same manner that it currently does.
If alternative C was our long-term condition, we would also need to add the pedestrian signal phase across Gibbons.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something in there about alternative C and alternative B, right? We would expect a lot more congestion under those options, even though they would, continue to allow the left turn. As Jimmy mentioned before, maybe an increase from 30 to 50 seconds of average delay per motorist. And so we actually would anticipate more diversion to occur. We just haven't talked about that as much today. So even with those traffic impacts would impact traffic flow, travel patterns, and potentially safety as well.
Scott, are streets that are heavier in traffic, like High Street, are those possible to be considered for traffic calming, like speed bumps?
We are working through a speed hump policy with the Transportation Commission, and we are at this point focusing on the neighborhood local streets where traffic volumes are lower, and we are really trying to make sure that speeds remain low as well. One of the challenges that we face with like an arterial or collector like High Street is that it also serves as a primary response for both fire and police to respond to incidents. So we would have to look at that. There is a possibility at some point in the future we may be looking at what are called speed cushions, but that's not something we're looking at in the immediate and the short term. The short term, our policy is focused on the neighborhood local streets.
This person is talking about the diversion element and saying that drivers on Gibbon are also sometimes racing to get through the traffic light at Fernside. Since that's not an issue for the streets surrounding Gibbons, wouldn't that make speeding less likely on those streets?
We think so, yes, particularly in the northbound direction.
Could we do more studies and do the traffic calming before the major intersection changes? This person wanted to know that. So first do the design and get the funding, and then restudy the intersection, and then consider the major intersection options.
Why don't I'll jump in here. I mean, one option would be to do like alternative C, where we make some of those kind of more limited changes to the intersection. Maybe there's some limited traffic calming we could do, and maybe there's some speed bumps in particular locations. And maybe we could do that nearer term. And then there's always the option. I think it's really going to come down to a policy question about how soon do we want to try to make that intersection safer and the safety of that intersection. We could wait to 2028. Or we could wait to implement that intersection and those safety improvements as part of the longer term Fernside project when we get the full funding, which would be in that 2030 plus timeline. And so that is really a policy decision. So those are alternatives and things that we can outline for the Transportation Commission, City Council, and decision makers, and that we could do that. But there's trade-offs, right? If you do some of these limited intersections, you saw that it makes it marginally safer, but not as safe as if you did the full alternative A. So they're just trade-offs for a lot of these things, but those are options that we can definitely present to the decision makers.
The next, and we have we're running up on time, but we have a few more questions. This person read the traffic study. The recommendation, as far as they understand it, is not to do anything at the intersection until there's funding and budget to calm the traffic impacts on the neighborhood side streets. Please explain the current thinking about the sequencing of the project. If no funding materialized for the traffic calming on neighborhood streets, would the city proceed with the changes to the intersection?
I mean, I'll try to take this. I mean, there's different ways that, there's limited resources, both in terms of staff time and funding. And so there are a lot of different alternatives and things, I guess, theoretically, could that happen? Sure. But it would be based on a recommendation that we're putting together about how we want to spend our resources. And if we spend them here, that means those resources aren't getting spent somewhere else in the city or another intersection or another neighborhood that also has challenges. But that's what we're going to try to take all this feedback, really think carefully about the different alternatives, present those to the decision makers, and that would be part of the recommendation, is to not only talk about timing, but also funding and how much those things cost and where that money is coming from. Some of it we can, if it's marginal, we can kind of sneak into the pavement management. It still has an impact because we have a regularly funded pavement management program, and some of it, but other things take a lot more time and money and may mean we're having to redirect resources from some other part of the city towards this project. And so those are the trade-offs, but we'll try to present those financial trade-offs at the same time that we're presenting our recommendations.
Similar question for Lisa. How are the survey results going to be used? They're concerned that there is some kind of bias in the survey, and they wanted to request that all survey comments be published in full rather than summarized.
The survey results will be part of the full summary of all the public input we've received. So, so it's just one piece that they can look at, and we'll also have results from this event and from the open house and from the emails we're receiving. And yes, we can print out the comments in full.
Okay, great. Next person is talking about everything that they're hearing is that this has been about safety, but the data does not support blocking off the Gibbons left turn will improve safety, but pushing the traffic onto the small streets where there will be safety issues. So then what they're hearing now is that this is about traffic congestion caused by the new bike lane. And then why wasn't that congestion considered with the Fernside project? Did the council members realize that they were voting to close Gibbons when they voted for the Fernside project because of the congestion? So how is that planning done?
I'm going to disagree with the posit that this isn't about safety. We see real design flaws in terms of safety at that intersection. We have a 70-foot pedestrian crossing. We have no pedestrian signal phase across Gibbons. There are serious design flaws at that intersection that we are looking to address.
The next person asks why you don't think, I think this is a question for David, why you don't think the increase on traffic on those side streets on Cornell or Bay Vista would add more safety issues to those streets. You're acknowledging that there will be some diversion. Why don't you think that will add more safety issues?
I'm not saying they won't add more safety issues. The traffic levels are extraordinarily low, which is great. They'll continue to be low with one car every minute or two. So we think there wouldn't be really a big impact. It's directional. It's one car every minute or two in the northbound direction on streets that could handle those. But certainly there would definitely be increase in traffic. There's potential for some increased issues, but that's where we're looking at traffic calming, right? What can traffic calming do? Over 55% of the traffic coming through the neighborhood is from outside of the neighborhood. So successful traffic calming can reduce that to even a lower number and reduce speeds throughout the entire community.
Yeah, I just want to put a finer point on David's point, which is that our recommendation right now, and again, we're taking feedback, so we haven't made any decision about what staff's going to recommend, and then ultimately the decision makers make the decision, but is that what we're proposing right now is we wanted to provide the data, be transparent. There are increases in those side streets from diversion, but what we're recommending right now is to take a couple more years to actually design some neighborhood calming. Maybe there's some things we can do right away as well, but to design neighborhood calming so that you're actually essentially mitigating or addressing that to a large extent so that you're not seeing increased volumes on those side streets by planning the neighborhood calming, the traffic circles, the speed bumps, so that we're actually mitigating that. So I just want to be really clear because I know there's a focus on that and I understand why, but the staff's recommendation right now is to try to mitigate that through additional traffic calming measures.
Jennifer, thanks for that clarification, because the numbers we're showing are assuming no traffic calming, right? We've been really trying to do a worst case condition with the retention of the same amount of cut through traffic, but with traffic calming, that's again a remedy to solve not only existing issues, but potential future diversion.
To that end, Jen, this person is a little confused about the timing and sequencing of the next steps. Is the idea that we are approving the intersection subject to financing for neighborhood traffic calming, or approving the intersection, and then we'll try to figure out the traffic calming later?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess it depends on what we end up recommending. Because again, I want you to all know that we're listening to you carefully and we're thinking through all these different alternatives, and we'll be putting some various thought into what we end up recommending. But what we would probably do is the next step would be we would come up with a staff recommendation, present alternatives so that the decision makers understand that they don't have to choose staff's recommendation. They could choose something different. And select something different. And we would most likely we would try to identify what that financial impact would be of that alternative. And then we would go to council with whatever the Transportation Commission recommended and also disclose those financial impacts. Whether or not we're also establishing that budget authority at that point, I can't say for sure, because I think some of this would be subject to a future pavement management budget and contract that we might do later as a part of a future budget. I will give that some thought, but ultimately we'd be disclosing what that impact is, getting the council's feedback. Yes, go do that, knowing that it's going to cost more, or that you're going to have to allocate funding from another source, or you're going to have to do that. And we would try to disclose all of that at the time that the council took an action, so that everyone's kind of doing it with their eyes wide open, so that we're not then later saying, oh, we don't have the money for that. So we would try to dial that in. Whether or not we're actually adopting a budget resolution that allocates the budget, I need to think that through a little bit and talk to the transportation team a little bit more. But we're certainly not interested in doing a bait and switch on this and end up not having funding later for the council recommendation.
So I'm getting questions fast and furious, y'all. I don't know. I mean, let's do a time check. It's 1:21. Do we want to summarize what we've done? I mean, I will continue to collect all of the questions that are coming in. We're creating an FAQ. We're going to be posting that as soon as we can, along with the questions from the previous meeting.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, I think, why don't we take all those questions? We'll be very transparent about all the questions that we receive and respond to. I want to give big kudos to Lisa Foster and her team, do an amazing job at this, where they're very transparent about all the information. We will give you all the answers, and then let us digest it. We want to do our staff work and work with our engineers and our consultants. We're going to digest everything that we've seen and heard and try to come up with, again, some alternatives that try to thread the needle, right? Try to address your concerns about a diversion to your neighborhood streets, even some of your concerns that you have now about the safety of some of your streets.
Yeah.
And then also really thinking about that intersection, which is not an intersection that we would build today. We don't think it's a safe intersection. We want to try to address that. And then we also want to try to address the long-term desire to have a two-way bikeway on Fernside that really starts to create these safer streets and corridors throughout our entire island and connects them throughout. So we're trying to balance all these things. It's complicated. That's why we have engineers. We have 2 engineers on this call, or 3. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out, Jesse, but so we will take all that and be really thoughtful about it and try to put together a recommendation as well as some alternatives. And then we're going to go through a very transparent process where you'll get another chance to weigh in, like, hey, we don't agree with staff, or yes, we do agree with staff. And we're going to go through that process with the Transportation Commission first and then the City Council. So I think, why don't we stop there, and then and we'll get to work.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. I have 70 questions that will be answered. Some of them, a lot of them we got to today, but not all of them. So thank you for your patience as we continue to answer the questions that folks are asking, and you'll be hearing from Lisa.
And
Thanks.
thank you to everybody for being here and joining us and providing your thoughts, and to everybody, my fellow panelists, for contributing. And, for those of you who are listening, if you are not already on our mailing list, we're using the Fernside mailing list for this project. You can sign up at alamedaca.gov/subscribe, or just go to the Gibbons High Fernside, alamedaca.gov/Gibbons High Fernside, and sign up from there. We'll definitely hear about all of these public hearings coming down the road.
And the PowerPoint from today is on there already. I went and grabbed it myself, so it's on there. You can share it and digest more yourself. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, everyone.